I gave this talk first time a couple of months ago. Some of you may already have seen it, but the spec changes so rapidly that there will be new stuff in here. If you have seen it before, it's probably a good advantage to you because I've got a couple of copies of my book to give away for the most interesting questions. So if you have seen this talk, you've got plenty of time to prepare. One of my favourite comics of all time is this one, All-Star Superman. The problem with Superman is that he's been around for 70 years. Everybody knows Superman. But yet, with every new Superman film or comic or anything that happens, they feel the need to recap his origin story. What this one does is quite interesting in a way, is it knows that. It knows Superman's got this baggage. It knows everybody's bored of hearing the origin story again. So what it does is on the first page, it just uses 4 panels very quickly, like this. Doomed planet. Desperate scientists. Last hope. Kindly couple. Boom! And then we're away. Origin story out the way. Here's Superman flying out of the sun. You know, we're straight into the story. We're kind of a situation like this, for me at least, with CSS3 at the moment. There's a lot of stuff, but some of the stuff that we're using now has been around for a few years, and we keep hearing about the same old things all the time. You get websites with 35 awesome CSS3 examples, 50 plus best CSS3 examples, 350 plus amazing CSS3 resources, all you'll ever need to become a CSS3 master. So I'm going to quickly just go through, like the origin story of Superman, just whip through some of the stuff that everybody knows very, very quick, and then get onto some of the really cool, interesting stuff that's happening in a few years. Border radius. Did you know you can put rounded corners on boxes now? Box shadow. We can do drop shadows. You know, they've done this in print for 200 years. It's about time we had it in CSS. Text shadow. Same thing as box shadow, but on text. Backgrounds and borders. Slightly more interesting. You can do multiple backgrounds on an element. You can put an image on an element, which means you can do things like you take an image like that, plus an image like that, plus an image like that, and make an image like that. Now you couldn't do that in CSS before. Selectors. These are actually slightly more interesting. There's some very cool CSS3 selectors now. First child, last child, first to type, last to type. They're really nice. You can loop through the DOM. You don't need so many classes. You don't need so much baggage in your markup. It means you can come up with some really amazing selectors like nth of type even, not last of type, which will choose all of the even numbered child elements of a certain type except for the last one, which is a big win. Opacity, alpha and color. So you can do opacity. We've been able to do that for a little while, but you can add the alpha channel to your colors now, so you can do kind of semi-transparent stuff. It's quite nice. It makes for some nice effects. You can get some overlapping, some cool stuff like that. Web fonts, big at the moment. You can use, especially now that Safari has implemented WOF, which is the web open font format. So you can start doing some really cool typographical effects with web fonts. I recommend you take a look at this site, thelostworldsfairs.com, which has got some really, really cool examples of what you can do with type. Media queries, again, very big at the moment. So you can start making sites, you can start making style sheets that adapt, are responsive to the device that the user views them with. So you can do a minimum device width and only serve styles just for devices that have that, that are that wide, at least that wide. Pixel ratio for iPhone 4 and high resolution devices like that. You can do some cool stuff. Again, a good site to visit is mediaquery.es, which has some great examples of things like this. Boom. Okay, so that's what everybody knows you can do with CSS3 so far. But that's not all you can do with CSS3. One of the most exciting things for me at the moment, I mean exciting is relative obviously, is gradients. So you can do linear gradients. This is a very simple syntax that will make a gradient that goes from the top of the element to the bottom and just transitions between 2 colors equally on the way down. You can also change the angle of the gradient, so this one will go from the, I believe, top right corner to the bottom left, could be the opposite, and transitions between 3 colors. Or you can do repeating gradients, so you'll get a gradient that will loop all the way through until it reaches the end of the element. So you can do kind of, oops, you can do stuff like that. They're ugly, I'm not a very good designer, but you can do cool stuff that doesn't look that ugly. You can also do radial gradients. So this is a very simple, center of the element out to the edge of the element, goes from red to blue. You can set which corner it goes from, when it stops, and go through multiple colors. And you can do repeating radial gradients as well, so these will kind of loop through. So you can end up with more ugly examples like this. Don't look at the one on the right for too long, you might get hypnotized. Radial gradients now has this very nice simple syntax. When WebKit first implemented it, it was horrific. This is the now standard implementation, so you set the origin and you say what shape you want it to be, either a circle or an ellipse, and you set the two colors for it to go through. When WebKit implemented this originally, it was WebKit gradient radial. You set where it starts from, then you set the beginning of the first circumference, and then a second circumference, which is where this curious number comes in. I'll explain that in a sec. And then you say from whatever to whatever. The number was, if you wanted to do a gradient that stopped at the opposite diagonal corner of where you wanted it to be, you couldn't just say, as you do now, just go until you stop. You had to choose this number, which is the square root of x squared plus y squared. Huh? Okay, that's resolved now. We've got this nice simple syntax, everything's good again. If you want to see what's possible with gradients, go to Leah Verou's site. She's got this gallery. All of the patterns you see here are made just using gradients. I mean, it's phenomenal stuff, awesomely clever. Much better than my repeating migraine patterns. 2D transformations, very ably covered by Inayeli before, so I'm not going to spend any time on these. I'll just whip through those quickly, so you can do some nice rotational effects and scaling. 3D transformations likewise. Transitions also very well covered, so I'm not going to spend any time on these, even though I did make a nice transitional slide for this. It's a bit wasted. Animations likewise, ably covered, spend no more time on this. Okay, but I want to go even further into the future of CSS3 now, and see the type of stuff that we'll be able to use. Well, the first one you can use kind of right now, the rest probably not for the next couple of years. The big challenge for CSS now, after we've got all the pretty stuff and the moving stuff and all of this, is actually how to do a decent layout, which is extremely hard to do with CSS at the moment. Floats, margins, positioning, all that stuff was never meant to do the job it does now. We know this, the browser makers know this, the W3C know this, so there's stuff in progress to make this kind of thing easier. The very most basic, multiple columns. You say how many columns you want it to be, all of the text, all of the content within the element you apply this to will slot itself neatly into 3 columns of however much width you have. Or you can specify how wide you want the columns to be. You can also do specify the gap between the columns. You can put a rule between the gap and the columns, and you can make elements span more than one column. Or in fact, it's either all or none. Which means you can do layouts kind of like this. Again, there's a bit of an extreme example. This is me being not a designer, but you can get your content that fits nicely into 3 columns like this, vertical columns, horizontal columns, with the element that spans all of them in the middle. So it means we can start doing more, perhaps, magazine-style layouts, maybe. It's not suitable for everything, but it's suitable in some small use cases, especially for lists. If you've got long lists of stuff that you currently float one thing next to the other, or you alternate them, or you use JavaScript or whatever, this stuff works better. Excuse me. Next is the flexible box layout. The flexible box layout, well, it does basically what it sounds like it does. If you have a parent element with a width set on it, and then you have child elements with width set on those, and you tell it to display as a box, the child elements will by default go horizontally into the parent, but then you'll end up with this empty space here. You don't want the empty space here. So what you can do with the child elements is give them a box flex value of 1. What that means, the box flex value is a ratio, and it divides the empty space between the elements in that ratio. So all of that empty space will get divided in the ratio of 1 to 1 between all the elements, between all the children. So they'll be nicely divided like this. But of course, being a ratio, you can set it slightly differently. You can set one to have a box flex value of 3, the other to have 2, and the space gets divided slightly differently between them. It's quite very useful for kind of responsive layout, things that have got to work on different devices, where you don't want to be calculating constantly. You can also do vertical centering, which is again something that's been ridiculously complicated to do up to now. You just set the child element to have a box flex value of 0, and tell it to be aligned centrally and to be packed centrally. Why they call this box pack, I have absolutely no idea. I genuinely don't. It's beyond me. You can also line up the child elements vertically and change the order that they appear from the DOM. I'm not going to explain why, because this box ordinal group is a terrible syntax as well. But you can put orders you can display elements differently to how they appear in the DOM. This is actually quite well implemented so far, albeit with some bugs. Firefox has had it for years, WebKit's had it for quite a few years, and it's actually just appeared in IE 10, the first release of IE 10. So now that it's almost ready to use, the syntax is going to be changed completely. It's for the best, honestly. This syntax is terrible. It's completely non-logical. The new syntax is nicer, but it does mean there'll be a little delay before we can actually start using it again. But if you want to experiment with it, this syntax works, and you can play around with it right now. Grid positioning. This is exciting. This is genuinely exciting. Again, exciting is relative. This is introduced in Internet Explorer 10. You can set a parent element to display as a grid, and then you set how many columns. The FR means a fraction. So in this case, you'd have 3 columns at the fraction 1, 1, 2. So 25%, 25%, 50%. Okay. You can also add rows to that as well, but you don't have to use the fraction value. You can use length values as well. So here you've got 3 rows where the parent element, where the top one is 80 pixels high, the second one is automatic, so resize to the content, and the third one is 10 EMs high. Great. Once you've got those, what can you do with them? Well, you can position elements based on their position in the grid, in the column or the row. In this one, we've got an element set to start in grid column 2, in grid row 2, and to span 2 columns. This is a really easy to use syntax, and it makes grid layouts really easy to use. It's fantastic. Likewise, the template layout, slightly more complicated but still good. Here we have our 3 elements as they'd appear in the DOM, and we set them to appear in position A, position B, and position C. What does this mean? We can tell the parent element to display the children in this order, A, B, C. That will put them horizontally in a row. The string you see there, A, B, C, means a row, and each letter in it means a position in that row. So the 3 boxes we've got here will appear in a row in positions A, B, and C. Okay, but you can add more than 1 string to it. So you can have 2 strings like this, A, B, C. So each string is a row. So in the first row, A spans 2 spaces, and in the second row, B and C have 1 space each. So you get this nice simple layout. And you can do more advanced stuff, like in the third example, so you can do A, C, C, A dot B. So the element in position A spans 2 rows, because it's in the same place in both strings. And the element in position C spans 2 columns. So pretty soon you can see with just these small text strings, you can start doing some quite complicated layouts. This doesn't actually have any browser implementation at all at the moment. There is a JavaScript polyfill that you can play around with. But if I can go back to the grid positioning module for a second, because I'm not quite done with that yet. In the grid positioning module, there's a couple of properties, grid cell and grid template. And these act in exactly the same way as the template layout module. And this is, as I said, the grid positioning is implemented in IE 10. But not this aspect of it yet. But it will be. So it looks like that it's going to be implemented probably in one of the future releases of IE 10, which is very cool. You can combine the two to make really nice complicated. You can quite advanced. You can quite advanced grid layouts. Finally, there's extended floats. like a float at the moment, you either float left or right. Now they're proposing you can position a float. So you position it, you give it an absolute position, and you set it 33% from the left, and the width is 33%. So that puts the element bang in the middle, 1/3 of the thing, and all of the text will flow around it. Just like a float at the moment flows, you know, to the left or the right, here the text will just automatically wrap around it, like we see in magazines and so on. This is another thing that's actually been implemented, sorry, not implemented, suggested by the Internet Explorer team. Bizarre as it may sound, the future of CSS layouts is going to be implemented by Internet Explorer. They're going to be the good guys. This is one that Adobe have implemented recently. CSS regions. I'm not sure if you've seen the demos of this. It's quite impressive. Excuse me. So in the example here we have two elements, element A and element B. Element A we set to be the source. There's the content, is the source of what we're going to do. So we set it to flow and we give it a name. Here I've used the old standard foo. And then element B, we tell it to use the content from foo. So all of the content of element A will be, sorry, the content of element B will be replaced by the content of element A. And you might think, well, so what? That's not very useful. What it does mean is you can set multiple boxes to use that same content. So in this example, elements B, C, D, and E will all use the content from foo. But it doesn't start the content each time, it flows the content through those areas. If you still don't grasp quite what I mean, time for my first live example. One second. Okay, so here you can see in this example, the content starts in the one on the left, next goes into the one to the top, and finishes in the one down the bottom. How do we know this is true? How do we know I haven't just cut this up? Because if I resize, you can see it all moving in there. So this is working now. This isn't in... Oops. Sorry, I'm falling apart. Give me a second to compose myself. Okay, so this isn't in any browser yet, but Adobe have released like a special version of WebKit that you can download to try this stuff out. And they're proposing it to be included in a future version of WebKit. So the other stuff you can do with this is you can create what are called exclusions. So I create a polygon using this format here, and I set the wrap shape mode to be around. What happens is all of the content inside the element I specified will fit to the borders of the polygon that I've just created. Again, what does that actually mean? It means layouts like this. So I've created a polygon in the shape down at the bottom. All of my text flows inside that. It will fit to the contours of the polygon. Once again, this is actually live text. I'm not doing anything magical with it. That's working in the example thing at the moment. We can also do basically the opposite. We can draw the same shape, but this time we set the text to flow around it instead of inside it. Whoops. Which is here. So this is basically the opposite. I've excluded the area of the sun loungers, and the text is flowing around it and will not go over the top of that area. What's this useful for? This is useful for things like, well, to start with, kind of iPad magazines. That's what they're aiming for. But longer term, we'll be able to use this anywhere on the web at all, and combine it with all of the stuff we've already seen so far, leaving some quite sophisticated layouts. Sophisticated was the word I was looking for earlier. Sophisticated layouts. So we can see there's kind of like this amazing world of opportunities opening up before us, but I'm actually not quite done yet. There's still more stuff to come. Seems like a little bit of a step back. The grouping selector, this just makes making selectors easier. Instead of having header H1, article H1, aside H1, we can say any one of the elements inside it followed by an H1. We can do that with some quite complicated things, like I'm sure you faced this before when you're dealing with lists and things like this. The any selector just makes grouping all of those together much, much easier. We'll be able to do calculations in values. Oh, sorry, by the way, I meant to say the anything already works in Firefox and WebKit, so you can try playing with that already. IE as well, beg your pardon, IE as well, so that's very, very soon. We can do calculations, we can do simple calculations like this. So we say width will be calc 20em plus 10px. You can also do more complicated calculations, and you can also do a little bit of modulus as well. So all of this, again, this is in Firefox and IE10. This stuff's working now. I mean, it's not ready yet, but it's working now. You can start playing around with it. Images, image sprites. At the moment we have image sprites. They're a hack, let's be honest. The way we do image sprites is a bit of a hack. But again, people are aware of this. They're working to overcome it. Here we can use, at the end of our image, we use the same syntax before. At the end of our image, we add X, Y, W, H, which stands for X position, Y position, width and height, which sets a region which just crops a little bit of that image and displays it in the area where we want it to go. Firefox already have something similar to this. It uses a different syntax, but it could do the same thing. You just, in this, we're using the same syntax as border width, I think, which is not very logical. Hopefully it will change to be something a little bit easier, but you can just crop out areas of images that you want to use. Longer term, we'll be able to have image fallbacks as well. So we can say show image.svg. If that's not available, show image.png. If neither of those are available, just make it red. Conditional rules, very exciting. Again, we can check using CSS if our browser supports certain properties. So we'll say only show these rules if your browser supports display grid. This will be ignored if the browser doesn't support it. We can use the AND operator, so we can say supports display box and background linear gradient, or we can say not. So if it doesn't support something, just show this set of rules. This is similar to how media queries work at the moment, but instead of checking for device properties, this is checking for CSS property support. Similarly, we can use this document selector here to say only apply these styles to this page. Again, the way we do that at the moment is probably by either by doing a separate style sheet in the page or by putting a unique class name or something. This gets rid of that. We can just say this specific URL. We can say that anything that begins with this URL prefix. We can say anything on this domain, or we can say we can start using regular expressions, which I'm sure everyone here is very, very excited about, the appearance of regular expressions in CSS. We started earlier talked about variables and mixins, and these are already in things like SAS and less. But it's been proposed to take them out of SAS and less and put them into CSS. So you can define a variable, give it a name and give it a value, and then call it later on. You can also do mixins, as was mentioned earlier. So you can do whole blocks of styles and just drop them in your code whenever you like. This is actually really, really useful for when you're doing animations, CSS animations. I was doing one today that just involved a lot of repetition. I ended up doing the same thing over and over again. A mixin would have been so much more useful. And adding parameters to mixins as well, so you can pass through arguments into the parameter, and very, very cool stuff. So in this sense, CSS, one possible future of this is that it's going to become a more programmatical style language. Everything's going to become a lot more powerful. You're going to be able to do much more stuff with it than it does now. At the moment, it's very much geared towards just displaying your content, and just kind of making your content appear nicer. But in the future, it'll be about kind of making things more efficient and making things more what's the word I'm looking for? It's not sophisticated. I've used that one already. I'll come back to that one. So there's a lot of, these are possible futures of CSS. These are not set in stone yet. Some of this, especially like the MIXINS, I've seen some very, very strong reactions against it from the W3C. They don't want this stuff in there. But it's kind of up to us to put use cases forward. Like the one I mentioned about doing animations, MIXINS would be extremely useful for doing keyframe animation. But whatever happens, the next few years, kind of, probably over the next 4 or 5 years, CSS is going to undergo some probably quite fundamental changes. But it's still going to be the language we use today as well. It's not going to change so that we can't use the stuff we've already learned. It's just going to become a lot broader. And it has to. It faces a lot more challenges now. It has to display on a lot more devices. And just in case you thought that wasn't enough, CSS4, already in progress. Don't expect to see it anytime soon. That's all for me. Here's a book that Ilieli forgot to put on a list of recommended resources earlier. But it is available in all good Amazons right now, and as an ebook download. I've actually got a couple of copies here to give away if people have questions. As long as they're good questions and not like, why did you pick those shoes or something like that. If they're genuinely relevant questions about what I've just said, I'll give away a couple of copies. So up to you guys. Excuse me.